everyone, welcome to another Music Talk Tuesday, and today we're going to be discussing songs about fire or reference fire in a metaphorical and or literal sense. Largely these songs are somewhat metaphorical, but you could maybe interpret them literally. It just kind of all depends on the way you envision the song to be about, because a lot of these songs are really up to interpretation and do have some interesting connotations to them. So without further ado, let me address the songs that I wanted to talk about that reflect onto this particular concept. First, right out of the gate, being probably one of the more famous songs that people have heard of, Ring of Fire by Johnny Cash. Oh yeah, this song. I really do enjoy Johnny Cash's music. I think he is one of the greats when it comes to the older style of country, and I think he really lends himself well. And this song is probably one of his more famous ones. And I really like with this song how it sort of blends this Western and Spanish style, because you've got the trumpets on one end, and then you've also got the sort of Western folk mixed in. So it's a very nice combination of the two, and they seem to blend together fairly well. And basically the Ring of Fire, this is probably in a more metaphorical sense. And I would say on the in particular when it comes to this list, I think this one is the more on the side of having a sort of metaphorical meaning, but also one that is a little bit more direct, because basically the Ring of Fire represents sort of an intense love, a love that is very powerful and also very passionate, I guess you could say. And basically that someone that he loves within the song is what's sort of causing this sort of ring of fire and the love that he feels for this person. And as further as he goes within the ring of fire, the deeper and more passionate his love becomes. So you can interpret this, I think, either as a intense difficulty or an intensely positive emotion. I think it's not really clear as to whether or not this kind of love is is one that is, I guess you could say, happy, or if it is intended to have maybe some underlying negative connotations to it. It's really not made all too clear, but it seems like throughout the song that it's trying to convey love in this very sort of gritty sense, that it's not just something that's it's not trying to portray love as something fluffy, but as something very powerful and strong, and a very, I guess you could say, maybe even violent force. I think fire in particular, when we look at all of the different elements, seems to have that very intense feeling to it that doesn't really present itself within a lot of other elements that we see within nature. So I could understand why Johnny Cash sort of used this kind of metaphor to express his, I guess, emotions, or the emotions that he wanted to convey within the song. And I think it ultimately works, and I think it reflects onto that country style very well, and is definitely worthy of a recommendation. Now, you could probably, at least for me personally, usually when I think of See a Ring of Fire, I'll suddenly start envisioning that song within my head. So again, even though this is not intended to be interpreted as literal, you can often visually sort of associate the whole concept of a ring of fire with this song. And I think there's a largely uh, good reason why you would think so. Because it kind of you kind of feel like it is trying to showcase it in a literal sense, but then bring out some metaphorical meaning behind it. So it's really up to you as the listener, but it is enjoyable nonetheless and definitely worthy of a recommendation. Have you not heard it? Which I doubt because it is so widely known around the world. Second song that I wanted to mention is "We Didn't Start the Fire" by Billy Joel. This song is actually really interesting and unique compared to a lot of other Billy Joel songs. Like, it doesn't, I think, have the huge influence of piano. I feel like there's a lot of different combinations of instruments going on. And what it has to say is actually rather unique when it comes to this whole concept of a fire. Basically, throughout the song, you'll see Billy Joel reference various points within history. For example, Nixon, Watergate. I believe he references the JFK assassination as well. So just various points within history that he probably actually lived through himself. And the whole point of what he's ultimately trying to express by addressing all of these different things throughout history is to show you that nobody really started the fire. Like, we as people didn't really start the fire or start the bad things from happening. It's just all of these bad things have always existed since the earth started. So it's really trying to make a point that no matter what generation you live in, no matter when you were born, no matter the history associated with the various time periods that you've lived in, there is nobody that really started bad things happening within the world. There wasn't a day when somebody just suddenly decided, hey, I'm going to destroy the world. It's just kind of an evolving pattern that's occurred over the years. And I think Billy Joel knew this fairly well because he was a history buff and he enjoyed reading history. So I think it only makes sense that he would write a song through this perspective, because he's really trying to showcase that every generation has its issues, every generation suffers different problems, and nobody started it. Nobody started this fire. And I think we like to oftentimes associate fire with destruction, with with mayhem. We hear all of these stories involving fires, and in particular, you can think of one within history. When Nero, I believe it was, who played his fiddle or something, and Rome basically burned to the ground. That whole concept of fire being the ultimate form of harm and destroying lives is something that I think has sort of existed within the subconscious of people. And the idea behind it is that you're not going to solve these problems. that there's always going to be some form of burning. There's always going to be some kind of destruction. There's always going to be some kind of thing out there that you can't fix. Um, and it's been happening ever since the world started, and it's not going to ultimately change. Now, could you say that this is probably a result of, as a part of maybe just human, not necessarily human nature, but the maybe dark side of um, human nature? And you could probably argue that there's a certain element to that. Um, that would make you believe that such a thing would be. And this song brings up a ton of interesting ideas when you really think about it. But really, what it all boils down to is the fact that the fire is not started by one particular person. It's just accumulation of different things that have carried on over throughout time. And that's eventually what causes problems, not necessarily one particular individual. There's usually an accumulation of different ideas that end up surfacing that ultimately end up causing some kind of problem or some kind of destruction, hence some kind of fire. And that's always been around, and that will continue to be around. Heck, even when humans weren't around, there were still always problems because you had natural disasters, and they even say that possibly the dinosaurs were wiped out by a meteor, although I'm sure there's still plenty of debate as to whether or not that's true. But regardless, there are still things that are going to be impacting the world, and you can't change it. You can only focus on particular things to, you know, maybe absolve certain things that will ultimately benefit people. But in the larger scheme of things, there's always going to be problems, and the world can't always, uh, unfortunately, be your oyster in the sense that, it's not going to be 100% perfectly peaceful. But the interesting thing too, though, behind this song was this: Billy Joel actually got the song from an experience he had with his friend when he was talking with him about history, and how his friend was saying, "Oh, those good old days that were in so and so decade," and then Billy Joel's like, "Well, wait, didn't you hear about this and that?" And yeah, there were problems back then too, So I think what we done is we try to idealize certain eras maybe, um, and think that they were perfect when really no generation in particular is perfect. Again, they all have their issues because these problems, they carry on over. They don't get solved completely. You can maybe ameliorate certain problems, but there's always going to be problems there. That's just how the world operates. So that's really what Billy Joel was trying to express within this song, and using the fire as sort of a metaphor for that destruction and that mayhem. And again, you could maybe even interpret it in a literal sense and say, we didn't start the fire, like we didn't start the the destruction in the building, But largely, I think this song is meant to be taken more in the metaphorical sense. And I think if you listen to the lyrics, it really does showcase that. But it's really a really fascinating song, and I think if you are a history buff, you will enjoy it. So yeah, I think that's really ultimately all I can say about that one. But moving on to Light My Fire by The Doors. That's another song that is rather famous and well recognized. Is actually the song that really launched The Doors' career. And I think apparently the singer of The Doors, if I'm not mistaken, actually didn't really care for this song after a while, because apparently it was the one song that made them famous, and, they felt like they deserved more recognition for their other songs and blah, blah, blah. But to be honest, I've never been a huge fan of The Doors. I've always thought them as okay. For some reason, this song I like the most out of all of their songs, actually. Um, I think it's just the way that it presents itself is just rather unique, and I think they really nailed down the sort of interesting uh, concepts that they were trying to get across with this song, um, better than I think a lot of their other songs, at least from what I've heard of them. I've actually haven't listened to a lot of Doors music, but from what I've heard, this one is the one that really does stand out to me. Um, and it actually is about more than what you would expect. Initially going into this song, I literally thought that it only meant the one thing, and if you've heard of this song and if you are familiar with certain metaphors, you will know what I mean. And the interesting thing is this song actually references a lot more. It kind of brings up different concepts like life, death, and love all sort of together. So it's not trying to be, I think, focused on just one thing, even though there were those out there that were thinking, oh my gosh, it means blah. Um, oh, the Doors, they're provocative. Um, uh, and the interesting thing is that a lot of it is rather open to interpretation. I really couldn't find actually any direct evidence as to the actual meanings or messages behind the song. That didn't seem to be all too clear. So it could mean what a lot of people at the time, even when the song came out, thought it meant. But I think you could either interpret it in a literal sense too. You know, uh, light my fire could literally mean a candle, or light my cigarette. It could mean I think a variety of different things in both a literal or metaphorical sense. I don't think the audience has to take it in purely metaphorical, although I think even though it leans towards that, it does kind of try to showcase, at least instrumentally, the kind of mysteriousness that surrounds the whole idea of a fire and the concept of it. And there is this kind of majestic and psychedelic nature to it. And it's also super catchy. I mean, this song is super enjoyable to listen to for the fact that it has this very well synchronized instrumental beats. And I think you can definitely take it for what it is. I mean, it could. I think it is obviously trying to bring up the concepts that I mentioned, but you can take those concepts and you can find your own kind of meaning out of it. I think because it seems a lot more open to interpretation because um, unlike the previous songs that I've mentioned that you do feel there is some direct reference to the fire. This one is very loose, I feel. It's kind of disorienting. And I think that's probably the nature, and that's kind of the nature of the song because it is a little bit out there and doesn't fully explain things to maybe to the point where there's any real clarity. And I think that was the whole entire point of the song. It was supposed to be a little bit deranged. So I think it ultimately works out to its advantage well. And that's why I think it is so enjoyable to listen to. So if you've have not heard of this song, for any of you younglings maybe out there, I would definitely check it out. Um, Definitely one of the greats because people really did remember this song and still continue to remember it. Heaven's on Fire by Kiss, second to last song that I wanted to mention. The interesting thing about this song is it describes sort of this unrealistic state of being. Unlike the previous songs that have either sort of a direct connotation to what fire is, and unlike the third song where things are a little bit more loose and open to interpretation, Heaven's on Fire kind of describes a combination of different feelings going on. Because on the one hand, you've got heaven, which sort of represents beauty, innocence, it's very soft, it's very angelic, it's peaceful, it has this very direct kind of meaning as far as the way in which people view the whole concept. And then you've got fire, which largely in part is a reference to hell, but it also is very passionate, it's intimate, it's in your face. And those two things are sort of combining together, which you will see within this song. And you could say that maybe the heaven represents the female and the fire represents the male, and the fire is seducing the heaven or slash female, and sort of they're coming together as kind of one. And what I think really works out well for this song in particular is the fact that it is rather edgy in its approach. I like the fact that it tries to go hardcore and be this really cool rock song. And it also tries to be a sort of a temptation song where basically the fire is sort of telling heaven to just love him, and basically heaven will never leave. So it's kind of like it's just trying to showcase this interesting blend of, I guess you could say, almost nature together. And I guess you could interpret it as being rather sexual, but it could also be, it could be emotional as well. There's many things that you could throw around, but I think largely, if you look at Kiss's library, you'll notice that most of their songs are intended to be sexual. But it is a very fun song. It doesn't take itself, I think, too seriously, which usually Kiss, I don't think, ever does. So it's definitely worthy of a recommendation, and it's fun. It's a fun little song, and I really like this whole blend, and I like the fact that they're using these interesting metaphors and really trying to put the edge in the fire. A lot of the other songs that I've been mentioning, the fire is kind of it's either very majestic or it's just kind of there to represent something, but here you really feel its power. You really feel its edge and its weight, and how that weight plays into being a part of heaven, so to speak. So yeah, that's ultimately all I think I can say about that song. But lastly, I wanted to mention a song that came out fairly recently, and is one that I rather enjoy, and that is Set Fire to the Rain by Adele. And I know that there might be some people out there who may think Adele is overrated or over exaggerated, and I think her popularity has actually kind of gone down a little bit. But I think for the most part, I think she is really a good performer, and I think she has this talent and this passion for singing. And I think this is a fairly powerful song, and I think one of her best, actually, out of a lot of what I've listened to by Adele. And basically, the song describes how she's quote unquote sort of setting fire to her previous or ending relationship. Um, it's really not clear as to whether or not the relationship is completely over and she's maybe somewhat delusional, or if she's actually still in the relationship and she's kind of trying to get out. Um, so it can be interpreted, I think, in a variety of ways in that sense. But basically, what happens is she describes how she sets fire to the relationship. In other words, she kind of just destroys um, her feelings about the relationship because she has this very strong love for this person, but this person is being, I guess, somewhat manipulative from what I could tell within the song, and is being very hurtful towards her. So she takes out, and I think there's a lot of kind of frustration too, like she's trying to rating out all of this frustration that this person has given her for manipulating her, for using her, and she's just pushing that all out there and letting it go. And by letting it go, she sets fire to it. In other words, she kind of just destroys the initial feeling she had for the person. So she lets that energy out. And uh, it comes off very effectively, I think, as far as how she sort of displays this um, metaphor with fire. And again, it kind of goes in similarly with the Billy Joel song and how he's talking about how fire is sort of a means of destruction and a means of problems. But with Adele's song, is kind of the fire sort of represents destroying the pain, the agony, and the uh, destruction, and the really um, hurt feelings that she has, and the love that she has for the person that treated her wrong. So that's kind of the the essence behind it. It's trying to destroy something bad, something that's not worthy. So I think that's actually rather interesting in that it's using the fire as a means of kind of just uh, creating destruction because of the fact that there's sort of this underlying pain that's eating inside of her. So the fire destroys that. Um, and I think there is this kind of beauty and this strong force that exists within the song that I think ultimately really works. And again, I think it really just showcases Adele's, I think, maturity as far as an artist goes. Obviously, she had a bad relationship, but she took it out on herself in, I think, a way that's not designed to be destructive to the other person, but to her feelings for that one particular person. So that's really the essence of the song, and I think it's done in a very clever and interesting way, as opposed to a lot of other songs that just talk about destroying some dude's car. Instead of actually really destroying the emotional anger that you have towards that one person. So yeah, I think that's really ultimately all I can say. Those are all of the songs that I wanted to mention for this list. I'll be sure to put links down below so that you can enjoy them. But yeah, I think that's really all I can say for this Music Talk Tuesday. If there are any questions, comments, or concerns, I'd be more than happy to answer them. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all have a pleasant day, week, month, and year, and I hope to see you all in the next video. Take care.